So let's start with a brief explanation of this last government pay cut report for 2021.
Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. As the pandemic arose in Canada, we saw lots of stories of private businesses having no choice but to cut employee pay. Saw a lot of businesses where CEOs, presidents, vice presidents would take a big pay cut, and then the people under them would take a smaller pay cut. But there were unfortunate decisions that they had to make. And as we saw these headlines emerging, we noticed that I haven't seen any about the government doing the same thing. So we started to research, just asking governments across the country, when was the last time that you actually had to reduce pay for government employees?
And what would you say are some of the key findings from the study, sir?
Really, what we've noticed is that in the past 20 years or so, government employees have been immune from what's happened outside in the broader economy. So we've often seen examples in the past couple decades where the economy has struggled and government employees haven't had to feel the pinch like what we've often seen people working outside of government have felt. So if you look at the data overall, it shows that it's been decades since government employees have had to take a pay cut. They were more common in the 1990s, especially at the provincial level. But then at the other end of the data that we saw, there were some cases where government said they've never reduced employee pay. The federal government told us they don't have any records of ever imposing a pay cut on federal employees. And then at provinces like New Brunswick said the same thing. So there really is two totally different worlds when it comes to employment in this country. You have people working outside of government that often have to face difficult periods, and then in government where you just don't see that same type of those same types of challenges.
All right, sir. Well, taking a deeper look at these two different worlds, what do we know so far about how pay cuts in the private sector during the pandemic compared to those in the public sector?
Well, again, I don't want to leave your viewers with the wrong impression. It's not that every business cut employee pay, but we certainly saw many examples of that happening across a wide array of different industries. The Canadian Football League, Cineplex, the movie chain. Naturally, people weren't going to the movies very often during the pandemic, so there were pay cuts with that company. Media, a number of different media outlets, energy companies in Alberta, manufacturers like Chrysler. So there were a lot of examples in the private sector. And again, we just didn't see that happen in the public sector. And I don't think anyone would cheer for that to happen, for anyone to get a pay cut. But there is certainly a question of fairness if you have people working outside of government taking pay cuts while still having to pay a lot of money in taxes to protect people in government to not ever have to take a pay cut. There's certainly a question about whether or not that's fair or not.
All right, sir, just about a minute and 15 seconds left here. But as you mentioned, both in the private and public sector, talk about wage cuts can be stressful for both employees and their families. So how does your report consider cutting government employee pay to be a positive development?
Yeah, again, I don't think anyone ever wants a pay cut, but I think if you're in government, you almost to be thinking for a while because you have to think about the alternatives. When governments struggle financially and their finances right now are unsustainable. So usually you end up seeing governments looking at a couple options, raising taxes or cutting services. And right now governments absolutely cannot be raising taxes. That will hurt the economy. So that means they're going to eventually have to look at cutting services, and that often means layoffs. So if you're a government employee, I think you have to be thinking, is it better to, maybe take a bit of a small pay cut, 4 or 5% or so, whatever it works out to be, or potentially outright lose your job. And I don't think too many people want to lose their jobs. So I think pay cuts are one way that governments can be a little bit more fair and at the same time continue to provide services to Canadians without having to look at layoffs.
All right, Mr. Craig, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, stay with us. When we come back from the break, we will take a look at Facebook and public perception. We'll have an interview with social media expert Dr. Christopher Schneider up next, so stay tuned. You don't want to miss this. We'll be right back.